Good morning, Rabbeinu Meli Shlita. So I gotta tell you a joke. I'm out of jokes.
I think that was already a joke about verbatim.
Well, I have a story to tell you. The Rabbi Ashkenazi, the former Rav of Kfar Chabad, who has now passed away, his son now sits in his chair, was 16 years old. He was a boy, 16 years old. And he came to New York. And he went into the Rebbe Yechidus. And the Rebbe said to him, Shalom Aleichem Harav Ashkenazi. Hello, Rabbi Ashkenazi. He was a 16-year-old boy. So he told the Rebbe, I'm not a Rav, I'm a boy. So the Rebbe raised his hand and made with his hand like this to indicate, in the future you'll be a Rav. So I was telling you the other day that in America and in our times, we don't like smart people, intellectuals. You're a smart person and you're intellectual. If you would give 1 or 2 years of your life to learning Torah seriously, what I just said would not be a joke at all. It really wouldn't. And when I see you face to face, I'm going to discuss it with you. I don't want to do it on the computer for more reasons than one. If you just sat down to learn and you didn't say Hebrew and Aramaic or a block, I have to read in English, you could push become a ben Torah, because 90% of succeeding in learning is desiring it. And any person who shows up at 8:30 in the morning to a Chassidus class in the summer every single day, where nobody's making him do it, is an intellectual. So, Rabbi Meli, I'm sorry for making jokes in the morning, but we will continue this joke at a later time. Okay, so we will yaitza a joke also, Baruch Hashem. Okay, let's go. Yesterday I didn't teach you anything. I just gave you a lecture. And the lecture I gave you was about this thing called Chochmah. That in Chassidus and in Kabbalah, Chochmah is considered very, very critical. Why? Because it's the tool of transcendence. The emphasis on the word tool is that it's at my disposal, it's at my control. But it's the tool of breaking out of my own shell. You don't break out of your own shell because you know where the next shell is. You break out of your own shell because you know that as long as you don't break out of this one, there's no possibility, there's no promise, there's no prospect of you entering into a different shell. So you leap, you take a risk. When you break out of the current shell, you have no idea how you're going to get into the new shell. And that's how you ascend from level to a level. So although Chochmah is a keli, it's a vessel, it's finite, it has parameters, but the tool of Chochmah is the tool of going beyond the tools. So therefore, it says in Kabbalah, that's where Ein Sof rests. As I spoke to you yesterday, as I explained to you yesterday, that when you learn Chassidus and Kabbalah, Pnimis HaTorah, that it's all about godliness, Alakus, right? It's all about revelation of godliness. At one point or another, you're going to have to ask and answer the fundamental question: how could godliness meet worldliness without canceling each other? How could Hashem be revealed in world? World should receive some of what Hashem is, some of what Hashem is should be revealed in world, and it shouldn't implode. That's the fundamental question. Now, it's a rhetorical question. It's a question that you ask over and over and over and over again. But one of the components of the answer to that question is Chochmah. No question about it. One of the components of the answer to that question is Chochmah. Because Chochmah has this property that it's a finite entity turning itself outward. And because it's a finite entity turning itself outward, it's an indirect vehicle for Ein Sof. In other words, Chochmah is not infinite, but it's going beyond self. And the fact that Chochmah is going beyond self allows that it should be touched by Ein Sof. This is a review of yesterday. Now we're going to read. If you want to say something, go ahead. Otherwise, we're going to read inside. Okay? I'm on page 242. Perek Yud Gimel, the Sefer's Derech Mitzvas Hatefilla. Yeah, page 242 in Perek Yud Gimel. I'm about 10 lines in. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Exactly 10 lines in. Middle of the line. V'hine. Kvar nizbayalil, says the Rebbe, I've already discussed, and I'm not sure where he did this. Sha'kli lekabbalah sheyislabish edin seif b'seicha. If godliness is going to meet worldliness, if Ein Seif is going to have any relationship with Kalim, with finitude, it's Bechinas HaChochma. It's the faculty of Chochma. Mishom, why is Chochma the perfect medium for the manifestation of Ein Seif? She Bechinas Koyach Ma. And I'm going to translate it very simple. It's the tool of detoolization. I just made up a word. I have a license someplace. Okay, it's the tool of going beyond limit. So when you say that it's the tool of going beyond limit, it doesn't make Chochmah infinite. But it makes Chochmah vulnerable. It makes Chochmah exposed. It makes Chochmah open. So a drop of the Ein Seif meets Chochmah because the direction of Chochmah is towards going beyond self. Bechinas bittel, the concept of bittel. Now, you're not a student of mine from this entire year, so I can't expect you to know this. But I always ask my students, what's the English translation of the word bittel? And we get the same ones over again, self-denigration, self-effacement, this, that, and the other. There is no translation for the word bittel in English that's in any way honoring the Hebrew term. Either it makes bittel seem like a terrible act of self-hatred, or it makes bittel sound like some lofty act of spiritual transcendence. Neither direction is adequate. So, in the 2021 edition of the Oxford Dictionary, the English translation for the word bittel is bittel, period. You just can't translate the word in English, so I use the Hebrew, because bittel is such a rich and subtle word on the one hand, and it's such an intense and compelling word on the other. Bittel means breaking self, that's what it means. Doing what I don't want to do. But it's not doing what I want to do because someone's hitting me in the head with a hammer. It's doing what I don't want to do because I have a sense that this is right without having to know and understand why. So again, there is no adequate English translation for the word bittel, so we use the word bittel. And the Rebbe continues, V'zehu ha'keli la'ashras Ein Seif. This is why Chochmah is the vessel for the resting of the Ein Seif, because Chochmah is the only keli, the only tool that comes close to the concept of Ein Seif. She'ein eid milvade. Next to Hashem, besides for Hashem, there's absolutely nothing. V'kula kamei, and everything in Hashem's presence is klach hashiva v'chulu, is of virtually no worth, etc. Chochmah is able to be touched by Ein Seif, because Chochmah is it's the tool of surrender. It's the tool of you know what the word surrender means, right? So usually you'll use the word surrender in a battle context where there are two sides that are warring with each other. They're fighting, and one side is losing until one side decides it doesn't want to lose anymore. So it surrenders, and of course it's hoping for terms, conditional surrender and terms and other things of that nature, right? But that's what the word surrender means. But in psychology, the word surrender means to let go, right? In a real relationship, when are a husband and wife really married? When they surrender, when they let go, when they let themselves be married. Not when they connect to another person, because you can do that in a controlled way. Chochmah is a tool of surrender. That's what it is. It's the keli the Eibishter gave us to be able to let go of our ego, to let go of what is familiar. And by letting go of our ego and letting go of what is familiar, it becomes possible, at least in theory, to become aware of more and better and higher and newer. And this why Chassidus says Chochmah is the seat where Ein Seif rests. It's still a question. It'll always be a question. After all, Chochmah is still limited. The surrender is also limited. But the idea is that no other keli at all is suited for this. Only Chochmah, because of this property of surrender and transcendence and, rendering yourself vulnerable, right? It's one of the healthiest things a person can do. Allow himself to be vulnerable. But in order for a person to allow himself to be vulnerable, they have to have a lot of confidence or a lot of trust or a lot of something. Rendering yourself to be vulnerable, which opens you up to what is beyond. This is what Chochmah is all about. Okay? Now, Ve'zehu ha'keli. Okay, I read this already. V'yachakach. Once Ein Seif meets Chochmah, So then, from Chokhmah, it can be transmitted to the next Sfiras. Hislapshusay bish'ara tesfiras, it'll come into the later 9 Sfiras. Aydem tasa Chokhmah, through the medium of Chokhmah. Sha'chokhmah islabeshes bebina, the Chokhmah will then go into Bina. Shebeteicha Ein Seif v'chulu, and inside the Chokhmah, which goes into Bina, there will be Ein Seif. Also v'chulu, and then the Rebbe says, etc. Etc. basically means you can figure it out on your own. I'm going to keep reading. I could stop it, but I'm going to keep reading. Lochein b'krishma. Now this explains why Shema Yisro, which is the topic that we're currently involved with, that we said that every single day, the Krishma in the morning of a day is like the Tkiyas Shofar of Rosh Hashanah of the year, that we're reaching a new Ein Seif, right? We're crying out, we're going beyond ourselves. And as the Rebbe explained it to us in the chapter that we overviewed, it's like a Yesh Meyayin of Seviv Kalaman rather than a Yesh Meyayin of Mamala Kalaman. Sha'azu Amshacha Ha'ara Chadasha Me'ein Seif. Krishma is the point where we're reaching out for a new light from Ein Seif. It's called Nikra Yichud Abba Ve'im. It's called the unity of Chokhmah and Bina. Why? The Hainu Sha'aba Hu Bechinas Chokhmah, the father goes on Chokhmah, is Mekabel Barishayna, is the first to receive Ha'arazu, this light Me'ein Seif from Ein Seif. Umeir, Umashpia, Achekach, and then Chokhmah shines and gives from the Ein Seif which she received or he received, Bebina into Bina, V'chulu, etc. Okay? So the Rebbe says, Shmoyne Esrei is a Yichud Zun. Shmoyne Esrei is a Yichud on a lower level. Kriyas Shema is a Yichud Ava, Yichud on a higher level. Why is Kriyas Shema Yichud on a higher level and Shmoyne Esrei Yichud on a lower level? It's very simple. Because Shmoyne Esrei takes what Krishma gives it. So Krishma is the first to relate to the Ein Seif. And because it's the first to relate to the Ein Seif, Kriyas Shema has to be Chokhmah. Once Kriyas Shema brings to us Ein Seif into Chokhmah, which then goes into Bina, in Shmoyne Esrei it comes down into what's called the 7 midas. Now, to use a language which you would probably recognize more easily, Chokhmah and Bina, Kriyas Shema is Yud K, Shmoyne Esrei is Vav K, the Yud is Chokhmah, that's the point of world. That means the point of Ein Seif. That's why the reason Kriyas Shema is a Yichud Avah, is a Yichud of Chokhmah and Bina, because in Kriyas Shema every day, Ein Seif meets world in a fresh way. After that, it's everything that came in that initial point of Kriyas Shema being brought down to lower and lower levels. This happens in the lower and lower midas, and the lower and lower spheres. Now again, I could stop and talk, but I'm not. I'm going to keep on reading. V'omnom, to be sure. Zehu, what I just said, says the Tzemach Tzedek, that Kriyas Shema is Chokhmah v'Atzilus, because Chokhmah is the point that's able to interface, it's able to meet directly with the Ein Seif, and therefore the Ein Seif goes into Chokhmah v'Atzilus, and then it comes down into Bina and so forth and so on. Remember, we're talking only about Atzilus. Now, Atzilus is the highest world. Atzilus is the world where godliness and worldliness meets. I'm going to probably talk to you about this. Today is Thursday, so our next lesson is going to be Monday. I'm probably talking to you about this on Monday next. Says the Rebbe, but the truth is there are many higher worlds. We know that there are multiple worlds higher than Atzilus. And the Ein Seif, which is brought down through Kriyas Shema, doesn't start in Atzilus. It starts in the highest worlds, which means to say that the Ein Seif first goes into the kelim of the worlds which are above Atzilus. And then the Rebbe adds in the parenthesis, V'gam zeh mislabeshes tchila. And to be more precise, in each one of those worlds, which are higher than Atzilus, the Ein Seif first rests b'chokhmah shebe'esei elam cholu, the chokhmah of that world, because chokhmah in each world has the bittul property, the surrender property, the rendering self-vulnerable property, which is a medium for the Ein Seif. Eventually, magia b'avad Atzilus, it reaches the world of Atzilus. So the Rebbe says, I talked only about Atzilus because that's enough for us. But the truth is, it's not only Atzilus, it's actually much, much higher than Atzilus. But whatever world we're going to discuss, how Kriya Shema is crying out to Hashem and reaching to reach for a new light from the Ein Seif HaSev of Kalam into worlds, in every world there's always going to be Chochmah. Says the Tzemach Tzedek, so I have a question. Why does the Arizal, why do we speak only about Atzilus and the Chochmah of Atzilus, if it's true that the Ein Seif comes into every world, even the worlds above Atzilus, and in each case it comes into the Chochmah? So why do we limit our discussion to Atzilus if the Ein Seif is much higher than Atzilus? So the answer is, it's not because it isn't true, because the Mekubalim were afraid to speak on such high levels. Because they're in such a high level. So they spoke only of Atzilus, and they spoke only of Atzilus not because it's not true higher than Atzilus, because they were simply afraid to go there. Aval HaKlalu, to be sure, the truth is, Shebekriya Shema, every day when we say Shema, Nimshach ha'oram mechudeshes mamish, we bring down a completely renewed light, or life. Mimekera the Kela, from the root and source of everything. Who Ha'erein Seif HaSev of Kalam Mamish, which is the level of Erein Seif HaSev Kalam, the infinite level of Elokus, and in each word that's to do with Chochmah. So the Tzemach Tzedek is giving an explanation. Why does Ein Seif rest in Chochmah? Why does Kriya Shema cause Ein Seif to rest in Chochmah? Because Chochmah is the medium for Ein Seif because of its bittul property. Why only Atzilus? So the Tzemach Tzedek it's really higher than Atzilus also. We're just afraid to discuss it. By the way, I want to throw something in. And again, today I'm doing reading, and on Monday I'll do talking. The truth of the matter is, even the Arizal doesn't talk about Atzilus. The Arizal actually talks only about Bria. The Tzemach Tzedek here talks about Atzilus. The Arizal talks about Bria. So the Tzemach Tzedek says really he means Atzilus, and he means higher than Atzilus. And in every world it's Chochmah. It's just that, quote, we're afraid to discuss so high. And we read on. This is explicit in the book of Likutei Torah in the section of Vayera. Now I want to tell you something. This is what's called GI, general information. We have in Chabad the Likutei Torah from the Alter Rebbe. Likutei Torah in Chabad starts in mostly in Vayikra. Vayikra b'midbar dvarim. Bereishis and Shmos is Torah Eir. Likutei Torah Pashas Vayera is the Arizal's Likutei Torah. The Arizal has many, many Sfarim. I told you a few days ago that the most important Sfarim of the Arizal was called Hakdamas and Kavanas, or Eitz Chaim and Pri Eitz Chaim. But there are other Sfarim from the Arizal as well, and one of them is called Likutei Torah. He's his commentary on Chumash. He explains the Chumash according to Kabbalah. Or, in the later draft, it's called Shar HaPsukim. Shar HaPsukim of the Shmeina Sha'arim is very similar to the Likutei Torah of the Arizal. But the Likutei Torah of the Arizal and Parshas Vayera, it says, and I'm reading inside, Ve'ein lecha shum zivug, you will never be able to have a marriage of Zun, of the lower half of Atzilus, which you and I are calling Vavke. She'ein zivug avah kedem lehem b'chol. There hasn't been a marriage on the level of Chochmah and Bina, which we're going to call Yutke first. Gam, moreover, avah leikim chayis yesem milmayla, Chochmah and Bina, Yutke are able to take more life from above. Adamatzel Elya, until the supernal emanator, which means the Eibishter himself, Kayachol. Kihu levadai, only Hashem. Yesh bekech lechadish tamat has the power to create from nothing into something. Lifish ein leisef, because Hashem is absolute without an end. And that idea that Hashem is infinite comes into Chochmah. Mashenkim in Etzam as opposed to the worlds, even the worlds that are godly. She'ein lem elala atmon, mashenit lem ulmayla. Everything they have, they got from higher. And since everything that the higher worlds have, including the worlds of godliness they got from higher, the power of creation cannot come from them alone. It has to come from the Eibishter. L'chein da, you should therefore know, this is Kabbalistic stuff. She'ein zivuk lamata bezah, there will never be a marriage on the level of Vavke, in Midas and Malchus of Atzilos. She'ein zivuk hu nimshach mamayla adein seif, that the source of that union is much, much higher, and it's fundamentally from the Madrega of Chochmah. And the Rebbe continues, that's the true meaning of the unity of Kriya Shema. Because you know, because a marriage of Chochmah and Bina creates new moichin for Zah, Habanim Shalhem, Teshuchlu Gam Heim, Liz Davik, Leitzibanam Achedim. That's Kabbalah. I'm skipping it. That's why when you say Shema, you have to have a kavanah l'Hashem hazivik ad ein seif. This is a union which reaches the ein seif. And then the Rebbe, the Arizal finishes. We don't know all these secrets. Okay, I just read a bunch of lines of Kabbalah. I explained a little bit. I'm skipping the rest of it. Bottom line is two things. Number one, if ein seif means world, it's through Chokhmah. Number two, there are many, many, many worlds, higher and higher and higher, and in each world there's a Chokhmah, and the Chokhmah of each world is the medium for the Ein Seif until the very highest world. That's it. Okay, so what I just did today would be called in the United States Senate a filibuster. I read almost a half a page, which is a lot of words. And I translated them, I think, correctly. And much of what I did in translation is very consistent with the conversation we had yesterday. Sunday, I'm going to lecture you again. In other words, the half a page I just read, I'm going to give you more of a schmooze. I'm going to give you more of a lecture, more of a discussion on what I just read. But let me say this. I want to finish. I'm giving you a short class, I think. I want to say this as I close, as an opener of Mizak, as a stage setter. What's going to come in Mitzvah Hashem next week? On Monday. On Sunday, I'm not here. I told you that. Sunday, I'm not here. Monday, yeah? I want you to acknowledge. Yeah? You could just do this. This is fine.
Sunday, Monday, you're not here yet?
Monday I am. Sunday I'm away. I don't want to. I'm so I'm so indebted to you for showing up to my class. I don't want to lose you. So it's very important that you should know my schedule. Okay, now let me say this to you. A guy told me, I was in, your roots are, right? You're a Zeiler. So your roots are New Haven. Sooner or later, your roots are New Haven, right? I don't know how many generations back, but your roots are New Haven. I was in New Haven recently because my children live there. I have a daughter there. And while I was there, a guy came over to me, an old man. And he told me a very interesting story. That guy is my father's age. I mean, he's no youngster. That when he was in yeshiva, going back 60 years, a bacher came over to him and he asked him, what's Atzilus? That was the question, what's Atzilus? So he told me, I had no idea why this boy was asking me what Atzilus is. That guy was 10 times smarter than me. And I asked him if he remembered what he told him, and he didn't really answer him. The boy who asked the question is, at least on some level, estranged to Lubavitch. Okay? I'm not going to say he's not a Lubavitcher, but he's not a Lubavitcher, but he's not yes a Lubavitcher. I know him. Brilliant, brilliant man. I know him. And I can assure you that he understood Atzilus a lot better than the person who he asked then, in 1960 or 1959 or 1961, whatever it is. So I'm telling you a story about a person who told me that another guy who was much smarter than him came over to him and said, tell me, what is Atzilus? And he was like befuddled, like, what do you want from me? What do I... And I don't know why this person asked this question. I don't know what his intentions were. But I'm gonna venture a guess. Okay, I'm gonna sort of decide what that person was frustrated by. Okay? You see, when you learn Hasidus, it's familiar, it's unfamiliar words, it's new words, it's Kabbalah words, it's words that you've never heard before. And they're initially they're intriguing and they're interesting. But when you get down to it, how much of it do we really understand? How much of it do we really understand? And I mean it in a very concrete way. Chassidus is not trying to fool us. Chassidus is not trying to pull the wool over our eyes. Chassidus wants to tell us the truth. But Chassidus wants to tell us the truth about very esoteric things, very hard things to understand. Or to say it even more precisely, very hard things to be able to relate to. Really. So you could spend your whole life learning Chassidus, which is what I do. I get paid to learn and teach Chassidus. That's my life. It's my mission. It's my job. And I've been doing it for 30 years. And before that, you have to figure a decade that I was learning as a bach in yeshiva. So it's 40 years. And every person can always come back and ask the question again. What's Atzilus? What do you mean? We talked about it last week, we talked about it last month, talked about it last year, talked about it last decade. Just hack stack up. Because as much as you understand it, you really don't understand it. And to be sure, there's a more primitive question. There's a more basic question. Before you ask the question of what is Atzilus, you have a right to ask the question of what is godliness. What is godliness? What is Elokus? What is God with a last name? Godliness. Because it's very hard to understand godliness. Okay? And to be sure, I mean, I don't know what you're thinking in your head right now, but you'd be most entitled to say, wait. Don't ask the question, what is Atzilus? Don't ask the question, what is godliness? Ask the fundamental question, what is God? When I went on Mekish Lechas 35 years ago, I met a woman who told me that since she's 2 years old, whenever she meets a stranger, she walks up to them and she says to them, what is God? And she's been considered nuts by many. She's been considered crazy by many a time, but this is her, she has a depth. Her parents were afraid to bring strangers into the house because she'd embarrass them with this. A 6-year-old walks over to a stranger, what's God? So she was 28 years old when we met her, and she was asking us, what is God? It's a rhetorical question. What is God? And of course, if you care about these things, there's two parts to it. There is the religious part. There is the faith part. There is the worship part. I want a relationship with God. And then there's the intellectual part. I want to understand. And they're not necessarily connected. They can be studied separately. A person can understand Hashem very little and have a profound relationship with Hashem. A real relationship with Hashem. That's based on faith, and it's based on practice, it's based on intimacy. And tragically, the opposite is also true. A person can have a considerable understanding of God and have no relationship with Him. They're not necessarily the same thing. In Hasidus, which is based to some extent on Kabbalah, we answer these questions. What is God? What is godliness? What is Atzilus? Because Hasidus Chabad, as opposed to other Hasidus, believes that having answers to these questions will help your worship. In other words, Hasidus is not about being smart. Hasidus is about having a relationship with Hashem. Other Hasidic groups, most Hasidic groups, actually believed and felt and held, you're better off not questioning. Don't ask. But just believe. The Alter Rebbe disagreed for all kinds of reasons. And he therefore invented this new shita, which is called Chabad, Chochma Bina Vadas. And in the philosophy of Chabad, of course, it's a Hasidus. Chabad is not a philosophy, it's a Hasidus, which means it's about an intimacy, it's about a relationship with Hashem, but that in order to that intimacy to have depth, to have credibility, to have consistency, to have teeth, you need to have understanding. So Hasidus spends a lot of time answering these questions. What is God? What is godliness? What is Atzilus? Okay? Now, the question, what is God, is probably the hardest one to answer. And is probably the most important one to answer. But you need to understand that this question, what is God, is not exclusive to Hasidus. The philosophers asked that question. The Rambam asked that question. Rabbi Saadia Gaon asked that question. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, the compiler of the Kuzri, or the writer of the Kuzri, asked that question. As long as there have been Jews who have been thinking, they were asking the question, what's God? But the question of what is godliness, and the question of what Atzilus is, this is unique to Kabbalah. So, anybody who's intelligent and deep and religious, he may not ask the question skeptically. In other words, not necessarily saying, because you can't explain it to me, I don't believe it. He's asking the question sincerely, but he wants to understand what is God, what is godliness, what is Atzilus. Now, every Maimer Hasidus has a different venue. Every Maimer Hasidus focuses on a different point. This particular Maimer is not really focusing on the question of what is God. It's focusing more on the question of what is godliness, and more specifically the question of what is Atzilus. And I'm going to be honest with you, this is my 56th 5-6, my 56th class on this Maimed. And of course, you were not here during the school year, so you didn't hear the first probably 40 classes. We spent a lot of time. I spent a lot of days talking about this very question. So I'm not going to spend a week going over this with you. But I want to repeat myself. I want to give you this discussion. And by the way, when I'm finished talking, you're going to still have the question. When that bocher came over to his friend and said, "What is Atzilus?" He wasn't asking him what is Atzilus because he didn't know what the Maimorim said. He knew exactly what the Maimorim said. He knew better than the other guy. It just didn't make sense to him. I don't understand. What is this godliness thing? What is it? It's a very, very hard concept to understand. And I think it's true to say that as much as you understand it, it always eludes you. You always come back to it again and again and again and again. You always say, wait, I still don't get it. The only way to know what Atzilus is to see it. The only way to know what Ein Sof is, what godliness is to see it. But for that, you have to be the Alter Rebbe. And we're not the Alter Rebbe by a long shot. So we learn about it. And we talk about it. And as much as we learn and we talk, it always eludes us. The question will always remain. So therefore, what is God? What is godliness? And that's what's coming up here. Shema, Kriyas Shema is very important. Because it's the beginning, it's the seminal moment of the day when we try to reach a new Ein Sof and bring him into the worlds again. And we must have the medium of Chokhmah, because only Chokhmah can receive, and so on and so forth. So, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop now. And Amir Hashem, on Monday, when we reconvene, I'm going to continue this lecture. I'm just leaving you with this question for the weekend, okay? I hope it doesn't make you into a heretic, okay? But understand that it's very easy to talk about these things. It's very, very difficult to truly understand them or sense them or feel them or visualize them. And I'm not going to give you clarity. I'm just going to bring you a little closer for you to figure it out for yourself, because I haven't figured it out. And I've thought about it for many, many hours. I've taught it so many times. And you always say, yeah, but still, so what is it? So I'm not trying to make it sound simple or easy, because it isn't simple, it isn't easy. And I said, ultimately, to know it, you got to see it, which means you have to have nevuah or ruach hakodesh or be some big tzaddik, I don't know what. But we're going to try. Okay? Rabbi Meli. We're good?
So, on the end of all these years, you're going to make me a heretic.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I highly doubt that. Anyway, but I thank you for coming. I'll see you on Monday, and have a good Shabbos. Regards to your parents. I want to make you a Talmud Chacham. That's what I want to make. I want to make you believe that you can go to yeshiva. A guy who likes ideas, I promise you, if you went to a yeshiva where there was no presumptions of prior knowledge, where you didn't expect you to know anything, in a year, not only you'd be comfortable Hebrew and Aramaic, you'd be a Talmud Chacham, you'd be a Lamdan. I promise you. I promise you. You have to just know that it's possible. So that's my goal. Don't get frightened away by either the heresy or the Ben Torah idea. But that's what I wish. A person with your mind and your curiosity. There's no reason in the world that you shouldn't satisfy yourself with the smicha that you're getting and become a real Talmud Chacham. Honestly, I'm saying it earnestly. Anyway, I'll see you Monday, Mitzvah Hashem. Don't get too nervous.